On an Aurelia Air morning flight from New York to San Francisco, a woman of color in a smart gray suit was asked to leave her first-class seat. She didn't argue, didn't get angry. She just smiled, gathered her bag, and walked to row 18Z in economy. Unknown to anyone in the cabin, the woman was Amara Lewis, CEO of Novacore Systems, the company behind the artificial intelligence platform that Aurelia Air is about to roll out across its entire global network, worth more than $700 million. If it were you when you were insulted just because of the color of your skin, because someone thought you were not good enough to sit in that chair, what would you do? Get angry or stay silent? Forgive or wait for the right time to let justice speak for itself? No one expected that just a few hours later, the entire deal, worth hundreds of millions of dollars for that airline, would disappear in the blink of an eye. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because right now you will hear a true story about the power of intelligence and dignity, where power lies not in where one sits, but in how one chooses to stand. The sky over New York that morning was unusually clear. Sunlight streamed through the giant glass panels of Kennedy Airport, casting long streaks of light on the polished tile floor. People moved silently to the sound of flight announcements. The smell of roasted coffee and expensive perfume mingled in the air that only those who have flown first class can understand the feeling of being chosen. Amara Lewis walked slowly through the crowd, her small suitcase rolling smoothly on the stone floor. No one noticed her, and she didn't need to. Her gray blazer hugged her shoulders, a subtle metallic sheen, the poised demeanor of someone who had been in rooms where billions of dollars were just numbers floating on a screen. Today she was on the early flight on Aurelia Air to San Francisco, a journey that would only take 6 hours, but it was enough to change the fate of an entire corporation. She is the CEO of Novacore Systems, the technology company behind the artificial intelligence platform that Aurelia Air is about to deploy to coordinate its entire global operations. A contract worth $700 million, enough to keep negotiations tense over the past month. Amara boarded the plane early and took seat 1A, a quiet corner, separated from the rest. She opened her laptop and checked the final technical report, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a crucial piece of code in the other. She never imagined that just a few minutes later, everything around her would turn into a social experiment she had no intention of participating in. The sound of high heels stopped beside the chair. A flight attendant, around 40 years old, with a polite but stiff face, bowed slightly. "Excuse me, ma'am. There's been a slight seating mistake. Seat 1A belongs to our priority customers. Could you please move us to row 18C? Amara looked up, her fingers still on the keyboard. "Sorry, but my ticket is 1A, and I checked in last night." Her voice was calm, not defensive. Just a simple statement. The flight attendant paused, then smiled wryly. "Yes, we understand. But the other passenger is Mr. Gregory Haynes, a special partner of the Aurelia Air management team. We hope you understand. This is a priority operation." "Priority operation," Amara repeated slowly. She looked around, seeing a few eyes following her. A few middle-aged white men raised their eyebrows, seemingly annoyed by the delay. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Part of her wanted to react, to ask if I were a white man in a blue suit, would they dare say that? But the other part, the part that had learned all her life, that anger is a priceless gift not to be given away lightly, made her just take a breath, then smile. "Okay," she said, her voice light as air. "Make sure my carry-on luggage comes along." The flight attendant breathed a sigh of relief and quickly thanked him. Amara closed her laptop and stood up, and in that moment she met the eyes of the man walking toward her, Gregory Haynes, an expensive suit, eyes confident to the point of arrogance. He said nothing but a small smile, a nod that was half greeting, half command. As she passed, she heard him say to the flight attendant, "Sometimes these people just don't understand how things work." The words weren't loud, but they were enough to cut deep. Amara walked to row 18C and sat down quietly. No one around said anything, but there were a few worried glances and a few heads bowed. She opened her laptop again, not to work, but to look at the reflection on the screen, her own calm face. She remembered what her father had said sometimes. You don't have to win right away. You just have to remember. She typed a few lines of code on her keyboard, then deleted it. In Novacore's internal systems, there was a secret protocol called Sigma Protocol activated only by the CEO. It could halt Aurelia Air's entire AI integration process, freezing all of their operating systems for a few seconds. Amara knew that the real power lay not in the first-class seat, but in the code she held. But she didn't activate it. She saved a draft file, calling it Observation.1a. The plane took off, the engines humming steadily. In the front cabin, flight attendants poured drinks for priority passengers. In row 18C, Amara sipped cold coffee, staring out the window not with anger, but with the quiet calculation of someone who knows how the world works. Everyone saw her being pushed to the back seat. No one knew that. In that quiet passenger compartment, a powerful switch was waiting to be turned on, and only she knew where it was. Across the ocean, at Novacore headquarters. The data streams continued to flow normally, but with just one click of her mouse, the entire aviation empire could freeze like a glass statue in a storm. No, she wasn't angry. She just remembered. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come with a shout. It comes with silence, a silence that makes you tremble when the truth is revealed. There are silences that are not weakness, but a way to measure the heartbeat of the world. Amara sat in row 18C, watching the clouds drift by outside the window. The plane was still flying, but in her heart, it felt like the whole system was tilting in another direction, where the truth had not yet been spoken, but had begun to have weight, unknown to anyone. While the passengers on board were watching movies or sleeping, she was reopening Novacore Systems' internal network. Under the multi-layered encryption, a small window appeared: Sigma Protocol, admin access granted. It was a kill switch known only to her and a handful of top-level engineers. It was designed for emergencies to protect data or halt all integration between Novacore and its partners. But now, looking at the text on the screen, she didn't see it as a technical tool. It was a symbol of real power. She lightly touched the keyboard, typed a few lines of code, and then paused. With just one click, Aurelia Air's entire operating system would shut down, servers locked, AI scheduling systems paralyzed, thousands of flights grounded. She knew she could do it, but she also knew it wasn't the right time. Amara had learned that power was never rushed. One only realized its true value when everything around them began to depend on it. And Aurelia Air, they were depending on Novacore more than ever. The full system rollout was just 72 hours away. Meetings, signings, and test reports were all done. Aurelia's entire engineering team had migrated to her platform, and all the company's operations were in the cloud space controlled by Novacore. She didn't need to shout to let people know she had rights. She just needed to wait. A flight attendant walked by, smiling politely when she saw she was still working. Amara nodded slightly, then closed her computer. Laughter echoed through the cabin from the front row. Gregory Haynes was telling jokes to a group of business travelers. interspersed with disdainful remarks about people who don't know their place. She didn't hear it all, but every syllable was enough to sink in, not because of anger, but because she had learned to observe like a strategist, not like a victim. She remembered an old interview when the host asked, as a woman of color in tech, "What keeps you grounded?" She replied, "I don't stand by strength. I stand by necessity. When they can't operate without you, they have to listen." Now, on this cold plain cabin, she understood that those words were about to come true in a completely different way. The plane lurched gently. Outside the window, the white clouds turned to the orange of sunset. A young engineer sitting a few rows away, Marcus Young, an employee of Aurelia Air, saw the seat change. He was still puzzled. Every now and then, Marcus would glance at her as if he wanted to say something, but then stopped. Amara recognized that look, the look of someone witnessing injustice, but not yet sure she had the courage to speak up. She just nodded, a nod that said, "It's okay. I'm fine." Actually, she wasn't fine in the conventional sense, but she was calm. And in that calm, a plan began to take shape. As the plane descended, Amara opened her phone and checked her email. There were dozens of messages from the engineering team. The final updates to the Aurelia Nova project, the code name for the new AI system. Everything was smooth. Too smooth. She knew. For any other company, this would be a good sign. But for Aurelia Air, it was a reminder that they were placing their entire fate in the hands of the woman they had just overlooked a few hours earlier. She wrote a message to the chief engineer team. "Keep all access in controlled mode. No auto unlock until I confirm directly." That's how she set up the game. No threats, no revenge, just controlling the system's heartbeat. She didn't need them to know. She didn't need anyone to be afraid. She just needed them to feel, however late, that everything they took for granted had a price. That night, after the plane landed, Amara returned to the hotel. The room faced San Francisco Bay, the city light streaming through the windows like a stream of thoughts. She made a cup of tea, opened her laptop, and looked at the system deployment timeline. The red text in the right corner blinked 7200, deployment countdown. 3 days. 3 days for Aurelia Air to realize who really controls their flight path. She opened the Sigma protocol window once more. In the corner of the screen, a small button appeared armed, pending activation. Amara smiled slightly, not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who understands that justice sometimes requires no weapons, only knowledge and patience. Out there, millions of pieces of data were moving, pilots, engineers, passengers, all dependent on the systems Novacore operated, and only she knew. Everything from flight schedules to fuel, from cargo holds to ground dispatch passed through the security she set up. It's underground power, no fanfare, no noise, but when it moves, the world knows. Amara closed her computer, her eyes falling on the old plane ticket sitting beside her desk. The seat number was still there, 1O. She picked up the ticket, folded the seat number, and put it in her purse. Not to hold a grudge, but to remember that sometimes the smallest light can spark the biggest change. She told herself, don't finish a chapter when someone else thinks they're done, because in this book, the writer some confrontations begin not with shouting, but with icy politeness. The next morning, the California sun stretched across San Francisco Bay, reflecting off the glass of Aurelia Air's office. Meanwhile, in her 32nd floor hotel room, Amara Lewis sat by the window, sipping mint tea. She had had a quiet night, but she knew the quiet was only the surface of the wave that was about to rise. She opened her laptop and logged into the project system. The 72-hour deployment countdown now read 48. Everything was fine, smooth, too perfect, as if the world hadn't yet realized it was sitting on a circuit breaker she controlled. She took a deep breath, then remembered the moment yesterday, the way the flight attendant smiled. Her voice sweet but firm. "For operational reasons, we have to move your seat." It was a small statement, but behind it lay a whole belief system that a person of color, no matter how successful, could still be considered out of place. That afternoon, Amara was invited to Aurelia headquarters for a final technical inspection. The 12th floor conference room was bathed in white light, its glass walls overlooking the skyline. Daniel Mercer, CEO of Aurelia Air, shook her hand, his smile wide, his voice deep. But his eyes swept over her as if he were inspecting a prized commodity rather than welcoming an equal partner. Sitting next to him was Gregory Haynes, the man who had occupied seat 1A. He nodded indifferently, as if they had never met, as if what happened yesterday had never happened. Amara returned the look with a calm expression. "Thank you for inviting me," she said softly. "I think we'll go over the access procedures one last time before the transfer." "Right." Daniel nodded. "Yes, but first, I want to quickly discuss something small." He paused, looking at her. "About the incident on the flight yesterday." The room was silent. Amara tilted her head slightly. "What problem?" Daniel smiled wryly. "I heard there was a slight misunderstanding with the flight attendants. They were just following the airline's priority operations procedure. We always try to ensure our most important partners are served properly." "Well then," she said softly, "I presume there is a written copy of that procedure. I would love to understand how Aurelia determines who is most important." The atmosphere in the room changed. Gregory coughed slightly. Daniel looked at the secretary and replied, "That is an internal procedure, not public." Amara smiled, a small smile. Not sarcastic, not challenging, just the smile of someone who realizes the invisible barrier they've just erected around the word process. She spoke slowly, enough for each sound to echo in the room. "Interesting. I've always thought that justice shouldn't require a license to be seen." Gregory chuckled. "I believe we are talking about airplane seats, not social ethics." Amara didn't look at him. "Sometimes, how you treat a passenger is a reflection of how you operate the system." No one said anything more. Her words drifted away, like a pebble dropped into a pond. But the ripples kept spreading and spreading. After the meeting, Daniel walked her to the door and said politely, "Amara, you know, sometimes employees just follow the procedure. It doesn't mean anything." She stopped, turned to look at him. "I understand, and I follow my own procedures. Daniel." He frowned, not quite understanding her, but then he just smiled, as if it were all over. Amara left the headquarters and walked out into the windy street. She opened her phone and sent a brief message to the Novacore engineering team. "Prepare backup mode. Don't activate anything. Just make sure route access cannot be changed by anyone but me." The small but official message marked the emergence of conflict, a war without guns, without shouting, but wrapped in commands and polite smiles. That evening, in the quiet of her room, Amara turned back to social media. A notification popped up, video of passenger being switched seats in first class. Aurelia Air was being shared rapidly. The poster was Marcus Young, the young engineer she had seen on the flight. The clip wasn't long, just a few seconds of the flight attendant politely asking her to change seats, and Gregory's casual remark, These people should know their place. Amara stared at the screen, expressionless. She hadn't asked anyone to post it, nor had she known Marcus would. But something in her eyes had changed. Not joy, not revenge, but the realization that the truth had found its way into the light. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Outside, the city was still noisy. The lights were still on, and somewhere in Aurelia Air headquarters, a group of people must have felt the heat creeping up their necks. She knew that tomorrow morning, their procedure would be headline news, and this time, there would be no sugarcoating it. Someone once told Amara justice doesn't need shouting. It just needs someone patient enough to wait for the silence to become loud. Now, she understands that more than ever. She looked at her watch. 47 hours before system deployment. She opened her laptop and typed a single line into her internal log. Phase 2 begins. No action, just observation. When they believe they are in control, real power automatically changes hands. She paused, closing her computer. A smile flickered across her face. Outside, the city lights reflected off the glass, creating a picture of two worlds, one of order on the surface, one of shifting underground truth, and between them, Amara sat still, calm, steady, and ready. There are people who don't need to shout to prove their power, because they believe the world has already assigned them a higher seat than everyone else. And Gregory Haynes is that kind of person. After the video of the incident on the flight went viral, Amara thought that at least Aurelia Air would choose to stay silent, waiting for the crisis to subside. But it didn't. 2 days later, the media leaked that Aurelia was handling it internally and found no evidence of discrimination. The words were carefully chosen, enough to make one believe that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. But for those who have experienced injustice coated in policy sugar, they know it's the system's way of protecting itself. Amara read the press release in her temporary office in San Francisco. Outside, a light rain was falling, droplets on the glass windows. She was silent, just watching the cold words dance across the screen. Then she smiled, not happily, but the smile of someone who has just seen someone confidently step onto a shaky step. That afternoon, an emergency meeting was scheduled between Novacore's engineering team and Aurelia's executive team. Amara arrived on time, as always. The conference room was lit. Familiar faces seated around a long wooden table, and at the head of the table, Gregory Haynes sat as comfortably as if this were his own private stage. His black suit was impeccably tailored, his silver watch gleaming, and he held an espresso. He didn't drink. "Ah, Amara," he said when she entered. "You're still on time. I was just telling everyone you have a formidable technical team. I hear they can shut down the entire system with a click of a button." Her voice was soft, but tinged with sarcasm, a kind of teasing hidden in the so-called compliment. The whole room chuckled lightly. No one dared to look at her for long. Amara just nodded. "Not really. Gregory, a good system can't be shut down by one person. It requires a strict approval mechanism, and I'm the last one to hold the keys." His smile faded, but then he leaned back in his chair, chuckling softly. "Of course, you hold the key. That's why we chose to work with Novacore. Sometimes, women have very good intuition when it comes to work, especially women like you." There was a pause. No one in the room dared to breathe. The remark sounded innocent, but there was enough contempt in it that anyone with experience could immediately tell. Amara looked at him, her gaze unwavering. She was not angry, because she understood that men like Gregory had no idea that they were revealing the true power-shifting hands. In his world, everything is a stage, every gesture, every voice, every laugh. He believes that power is about making others smaller before him, as if their inferiority is the basis for his own superiority. Amara had met many people like that. People who thought politeness was synonymous with morality. People who thought they were joking, but whose jokes were built on a century of prejudice. She listened, observed. She memorized every word he said, not to exact revenge, but to shape the structure of her response. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to retort. She just needed to let him speak, because his own mouth would build a wall around his arrogance. When the meeting ended, Gregory stepped closer to her, his voice low enough for only the two of them to hear. "Amara," he said, "I personally admire your composure, but you should know that in this world, silence sometimes makes others think you are weak." Amara looked at him for a moment, then smiled. "And sometimes, silence makes people misjudge their position." He paused. Her gaze wasn't cold, nor was it harsh, just the gaze of someone who knew better. The kind that made you feel as if you were treading on thin ice. That night, as she left the building, Amara stopped on the ground floor. The San Francisco sky was still rainy. She stood for a moment, watching the cars pass by, her heart as light as dew. She thought of Gregory, of his smile, of his confident voice. And she knew he was the counterbalance this story needed. Not because he was evil, but because he was so brutally honest in his belief that he belonged to a higher caste. The world is full of people, like Gregory people, who were raised with the feeling that they were entitled. And it is only when the world changes its structure that they realize privilege is not an essence, but a collective illusion. She returned to her room and turned on her computer. The words "Deployment 36 hours remaining" appeared in the corner of the screen. Amara opened her local folder, created a new file, and noted Target GH tends to deny discriminatory behavior. Signs believes power is about position, not ability. Response: observe, not confront directly. Goal: let him reveal himself to the public. She lingered, turning off the engine. Outside, the wind beat against the window, carrying the smell of sea salt. She poured more tea, her eyes distant not of someone calculating, but of someone who had accepted that justice did not need to be loud to have weight. The next morning, the press began to talk about the incident. No one mentioned Amara by name, but people talked about the black female passenger who was downgraded due to unclear preferential policies. And in the commentary, people began to ask, if one tech CEO is treated like that, how many others have to suffer the same thing without a voice? The question lingered, quietly but deeply. On the other side, Gregory Haynes remained calm, still believing that some media storm would pass. Little did he know, the real storm had yet to begin, and the eye of the storm lay in the hands of the woman he once considered just a small client. Amara looked at the news feed on her phone and nodded. No need to intervene, no need to say anything. She knew the world was taking its course, and she just had to wait for the right moment when the double-decker game she had set in motion would make it clear to everyone. It wasn't that she was in the wrong seat. It was that they were sitting in the wrong seat of power that they no longer deserved to hold. Real storms never start with the first lightning strike. They begin with a long lull, the kind that makes people think they're safe. That night, after the press reported the first-class incident, Amara Lewis sat in the quiet room, the only light from her laptop screen reflecting on her face. She read each comment, each tweet, then gently closed her laptop. She didn't smile, nor was she angry. Just a moment of contemplation, as if she were weighing the weight of each upcoming decision. She knew that with just one command, just one click, the Sigma protocol would be activated. Aurelia Air's AI system would freeze in less than 30 seconds. From Seattle to Singapore, every flight in their network would be grounded. All engineering, dispatch, customer data, completely paralyzed. She could do it now. No one could stop her. No one could trace her. And then, everyone will know who is really sitting in seat 1A. But Amara didn't press enter. She let the mouse cursor flicker between two worlds. One was the instinctive reaction of an offended human. The other was the vision of the system's master, inside her. There was a silent dialogue between the part of her that wanted immediate justice and the part that understood that true justice could not be built on anger. She remembered what her father had said one night long ago, when she was the only black girl in her programming class in Texas. "You don't have to win today, Amara. You just have to stay long enough for them to prove to you tomorrow why you shouldn't win." The words came back, as clear as if they had just been spoken. She lowered her hands to the keyboard. Instead of hitting send, she opened the drafts tab, saved the unfinished email, and quietly deleted it. The next morning, the media began to shift. Some newspapers defended Aurelia, saying there was no clear evidence of discrimination. Others defended Amara, calling her a courageous CEO. But she knew this was not the time. Justice should not be an online poll. She looked out the hotel window. The California sky was still bright. Seagulls circled oblivious to the ground. Millions of dollars and millions of egos colliding. The phone rang. A message from Marcus Young, the young engineer who had posted the video. "I'm sorry if I brought too much attention to you. I just couldn't bear to see it happen." Amara read and smiled. "It's okay, Marcus. Sometimes one needs a light to see when one is standing in the darkness." She sent it, then put the phone down. At noon, she arrived at Novacore Systems' temporary office in San Francisco. The office was small, neat, and dimly lit. On the large screen on the wall, the countdown clock continued deployment countdown, 24 hours remaining. Her engineering team was working frantically. They had no idea what was really going on out there, only that their CEO looked strangely calm. She looked at the screen, then said slowly to the assistant, "No one changed the final configuration. Everything remains the same. If there is a request for intervention from Aurelia's side, pass it on to me." "Yes, ma'am." Amara turned and walked out into the hallway. She needed air. As the elevator doors closed, she saw her reflection in the cold steel standing tall, face calm, eyes still bright. Not of someone retaliating, but of someone waiting for the right moment to expose the system. In the afternoon, an email arrived from Daniel Mercer, CEO of Aurelia Air. The content was brief, almost patronizing Amara. "I expect Novacore to ensure that the deployment is not delayed, regardless of the media situation. We need a stable operational report by 8 a.m. tomorrow. No, please. No, thank you." The words carried the same tone she had heard from flight attendants, the tone that believed others would do the right thing just because they said so. Amara finished reading, nodded slightly. She typed a single line. "Of course, Daniel. The system will work exactly as it was designed. And yes, it will work exactly as designed only if the designer allows it to." Night fell. San Francisco was bright, and in the distance, Aurelia's planes were landing one after another. She watched them through the window, feeling like she was watching the stars orbiting within reach. She opened her laptop again and entered the control system. On the screen, the Sigma protocol window lit up again. The words were cold. "Activate system lock. Yes, no." Her fingers paused on the keyboard. Dozens of voices echoed in her head, the staff, her friends, her father. But then they all quieted down to a single thought. If we act now, they will blame their emotions. But if we wait, they will reveal themselves why justice must come. She closed the command window. Do not activate. Instead, she opened the observations folder she'd created since leaving 1A. Inside, each note was time-stamped. Gregory's words, Daniel's demeanor, press releases, legal department's evasive behavior. A silent record, but enough to serve as evidence when things fell apart. She took a deep breath and leaned back in her chair. The light from the screen reflected on her face, making her eyes look even more determined. She realized true power lies not in the ability to fight back, but in knowing when not to fight. Sometimes, silence is the way to let the world hear your voice. Sometimes, taking a step back is not because of fear, but because you want others to go so far that they themselves step into the boundary of error. She closed her laptop, turned off the lights, leaving only the countdown timer on the big screen. Deployment countdown, 18 hours remaining. Amara watched the number as she watched the flow of time. She knew that when the clock reached 0, Aurelia Air would face the price of her arrogance. And when she did, she would do nothing. Just witness. Sometimes, to make a system realize its flaws, we don't need to destroy it. We just need to let it stumble on the very mechanism it once believed was perfect. After that night, Amara slept less than usual, not because of stress, but because her mind was busy putting the final details in place for what she called her double-decker game. She understood on the surface. Everything must have looked normal. The project was still running. The engineering team was still meeting. Aurelia still believed they were getting closer to the historic launch. But deep down, a level only she could reach, every control had been reprogrammed to wait for a single signal from her. It's no longer a reaction. It's a strategy. In the morning, the sunlight shone through the curtains, creating golden streaks on the desk. Amara made herself a cup of black coffee and turned on her laptop. A familiar line appeared on the screen, deployment countdown, 12 hours remaining. She opened a new window, Sigma Protocol Manual Override. Her hands moved slowly over the keyboard. Each command line was entered, as carefully as a jeweler engraving the final details on an expensive piece of jewelry. Command 01 Lock AI Scheduler. Command 02 Suspend Cloud Access. Command 03 Freeze Integration, pending final trigger. Each command was a deep, steadying breath. Amara's hand didn't shake, nor did she hesitate. She wasn't breaking. She was simply setting up a new safety mechanism, a door that only the worthy could open. She saved the script. She didn't send it. Instead, she put it in a draft folder called Midnight Protocol. Once she selected the time, the system would automatically run the trigger. She said softly to herself, not to get revenge, but to make them see where they went wrong. At noon, she arrived at the Aurelia Air office. The atmosphere in the headquarters was busier than usual. Newspapers, reporters, and even employees were whispering about the latest article online. Black female CEO demoted, Aurelia Air has not apologized. Financial columns began to analyze if Novacore pulled out of the deal. Aurelia's entire operating system would cripple, causing hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. Yet Gregory Haynes continued to walk down the hallway, his dark blue suit on, his half-smile unchanged. When he saw Amara, he stopped and shrugged, as if to say, I'm still here, and nothing's happened. Amara responded with a slight nod, then continued walking. There was no hatred in her eyes, just a calm, cold light like the surface of a lake, where all plans were quietly reflected. The technical meeting proceeded as usual. Daniel Mercer, CEO of Aurelia, addressed the team. Tomorrow is a milestone for us. The new system will save millions of dollars a year. I want to thank Novacore for their great partnership. The room applauded. Amara smiled too. Proper etiquette. Then she stood up, her voice low but clear. I have just one small request. When the system is activated, Aurelia needs to ensure that all access processes are transparent, with no hidden accounts. I want to report the highest level of access signed by the Security Council. Daniel paused, then smiled. Of course, Amara. Don't worry. Everything is according to procedure. The words according to procedure resounded again, this time as light as the wind. But to her, they carried the same flavors that day on the plane. A sweet flavor mixed with arrogance. After the meeting, Amara returned to the hotel. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop again, and looked again at the draft order she had saved this morning. Outside, the sunset painted the San Francisco sky gold. The distant train whistle sounded long and deep. She typed in a few more lines of code, then paused, reading it all over again. Every letter, every number was perfect. She notes below, save as draft. Don't activate until landing. Ideal timing midway through a successful rollout, when the entire system needs to run the first report. It was the moment she chose to land, the moment when Aurelia was at her most confident, most complacent, and also most vulnerable. Her two-tiered game wasn't about emotional retaliation. On the top level, she gave them everything they wanted: cooperation, peace, and a schedule. But on the bottom level, where the real power lay hidden in the digital system, she had set a switch for the whole truth to come out if they continued to hide. Late at night, Amara stood at the window, looking down at the city lights. She wondered how many women had been in the same situation as her, swept aside gently, apologized with flattery, and then forgotten with a due process statement. She knew that if she reacted with anger today, they would have a reason to paint her as an angry, uncontrollable woman. But if she stayed silent and waited, then when the fall came, it would no longer be about the emotion, but the consequence. She gently closed her eyes and whispered as if talking to herself, "The game has begun." But no one knows they are playing. The next morning, she woke up early. She neatly put on her gray suit, fixed her hair, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were calm enough to make others worry. On the phone screen, the countdown clock only had 5 hours left. At Aurelia headquarters, the team was preparing for the online announcement. The large conference room was decorated with lights, press, cameras, lights, all ready to announce the successful collaboration between Aurelia Air and Novacore Systems. Among the attendees, Gregory Haynes, as confident as ever, stood next to Daniel, shaking hands with the guests, smiling brightly. As for Amara, she walked in calmly, the phone in her hand displaying the command window midnight protocol standby. One tap, and the whole 2-story game starts. But she didn't touch, not because she was hesitant, but because she wanted them to land first, literally and figuratively. Only when everyone applauds, only when they believe they have won, does the shutdown become a mirror of the truth that not everyone in the front seat is the one driving. She smiled slightly, put her phone in her pocket, and walked towards the stage. In her head, the lines of code continued to run silently. No one knew that, beneath this polite and orderly appearance, a chessboard had been set up where the once despised person held the final position. She raised her head, looking straight into the camera lens, and in that moment, the 2-story game officially began. Sometimes history isn't changed by big decisions, but by one small action, by someone who seems to have no power. That morning, Amara Lewis walked into the main hall of Aurelia Air, where the cooperation announcement was held in great fanfare. Reporters, cameras, and bright lights. On the giant LED screen, the words were clearly displayed, Aurelia Air. Take off with Novacore Systems. She stood in the middle of that crowd, silent as a dot in the grand picture. She knew that in a few hours, the double-decker would be in operation, but no one could predict which direction the storm would come from. And then, in that seemingly peaceful morning, another spark suddenly flared from a person who was completely out of the plan. Marcus Young, a young engineer for Aurelia Air who sat in the back of the fateful flight, still remembers that day. The scene of the black woman being asked to leave seat 1A to make way for priority passengers is etched in his mind. Not because it was strange, but because it was so familiar. Marcus had worked for Aurelia for 3 years, seen more than his share of special procedures that only benefited certain people. But that day, for the first time, he saw it happen to someone he recognized. He knew Amara. He'd read about her in tech magazines. The woman once hailed as the brains behind the civilian AI revolution, the creator of the platform his own company used to plan flights. And that day, they told her to give up her seat. Just because of priority operations, just because she didn't look like a CEO. Marcus sat in row 22D, phone in hand. When the flight attendant asked Amara to leave her seat, he hesitated for a few seconds before pressing the video button. There was no other intention, just a reflex, as if he wanted to record something that he knew no one would believe if he didn't record it. He hadn't meant to post it. But when he saw Gregory Haynes, that VIP, drop the breathless, these people should know their place, he knew he couldn't stay silent. The night before the announcement, as everyone else was busy preparing their speeches, Marcus sat in his small apartment, quietly editing a 17-second video clip. In it, Amara stood up, smiled, said, and walked out of the frame. Then Gregory's voice came through. Not angry, not loud, but clear enough for everyone to hear. He sat staring at the screen, his finger hovering over the post button. His rational mind told him to stop. You're going to lose your job, Marcus. But his human side whispered, if no one says anything, this will happen over and over again. In the end, he chose the second part. He typed, Novacore CEO was asked to leave seat 1A to make way for Aurelia Air's white VIP. She kept quiet, but I couldn't. Aurelia Air Novacore, your equality. Then click tweet. In just 20 minutes, the post surpassed 10,000 views. 3 hours later, it went viral. Major newspapers retweeted it. Comments were filled with outrage. I can't believe it's 2025. A woman of color has to give up her seat for white privilege, Aurelia Air. Say something. The airplane cabin, which was once just a small space, has now become a global public stage. At Aurelia headquarters, the phones rang off the hook. PR was running around. Daniel Mercer paled when he read the news. Gregory Haynes called the media, trying to correct the situation, but his words only made matters worse. We were just following the procedure, he said. Nobody meant to offend anybody. That seemingly harmless remark further inflamed public opinion. People began to ask if the process can offend others. Then the process itself is the problem. Amara found out backstage at the announcement. An assistant came over and handed her the phone. She looked at the screen, saw the familiar video, heard Gregory's voice again. She was silent. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, just let out a soft sigh. In that moment, she understood that she didn't need to activate anything. The two-story game she had prepared now had an additional participant, even though no one invited him, the nameless young engineer who had chosen to stand on the right side. She said softly, "Now, they will have to hear their own voices heard in front of the world." That afternoon, Aurelia's agency called an emergency meeting. PR, legal, communications. Everyone was in a state of panic. Daniel tried to keep his voice calm, but sweat was beading on his forehead. "We need Amara on the main broadcast. If she backs out, everything will collapse. Contact her now." Meanwhile, Amara sat quietly, listening to the news spread across social media. She said nothing. She posted nothing. She did not respond, because she knew that silence was no longer avoidance. It was a beacon for justice to find its way. That night, Marcus received thousands of messages. Some thanked him, some threatened him. He just sat there silently, watching the post spread. Then a message appeared. "Amara Lewis, I saw the video. Thank you for not choosing to stay silent." He read the message over and over again, feeling an indescribable feeling rise in his heart. Not pride, but serenity. He simply replied, "No one should be treated like that, especially someone who helped us fly higher." As night fell, the city was still brightly lit. News sites were flooded with images of Amara in the video. Aurelia Air was forced to announce an internal investigation, and the government demanded a transparent report. Within 24 hours, Aurelia's stock price fell 11%. The question was no longer who was right, who was wrong, but why is this still happening? Amara stood by the window, looking down at the sea of lights. She knew the double-decker had been activated, not by a click, but by the power of truth and the courage of a young person. She thought to herself, sometimes power does not lie in the hands of the strong. It lies in the hands of those who dare to look straight at what is wrong. She smiled slightly. In the midst of a storm, she was as calm as someone who knows the direction of the wind, because she understood when the public saw what they had previously ignored, no procedure could cover it up. Real storms never hit all at once. They start with small tremors, strange signals that people often ignore, until they realize that things are out of control. After the video went viral, Aurelia Air entered its third day of crisis. But for Amara Lewis, this wasn't just a media blip, it was a moment of power in motion. That morning, when she woke up, the first news item appeared on her phone. Aurelia Air stung by discriminatory video, shares drop. Another 14%. Transport Ministry orders investigation into priority passenger procedure. She read without expression. No gloating, no anger. Just an eerie calm, as if she had known this would happen. Outside, the early morning light fell on the white walls of the hotel room, and in that silence, the two-story game began a new round this time, not by her action, but by Aurelia herself. At Aurelia Air headquarters, chaos reigned. Phones rang nonstop. Hundreds of error and warning emails from the technical team appeared on the giant screen of the control center. Server response is slow. Cloud connection is interrupted. AI scheduler is inaccessible. The technical director shouted over the radio, "We cannot access the dispatch system. The entire flight scheduling network is locked." CEO Daniel Mercer rushed out of the conference room, his face pale. "Locked? What do you mean? Locked?" The engineer trembled. "We don't know." "Sir, Novacore's security protocol has blocked administrative access. They said only Amara Lewis can open it." In that moment, Daniel fell silent. The room felt like a vacuum. It all clicked. The system they thought they owned was actually subleasing control from a woman they once took for granted. At noon, an emergency meeting was held. The board of directors appeared online, each face full of tension. An elderly member spoke bluntly. "Daniel, Why can't we restore the system yet? Who authorized the full access to be given to the partner? Novacore is top-rated. We trust them, Daniel replied, his voice shaking. But Ms. Lewis has top-level control. I emailed her to open the access. And did she answer? Daniel swallowed. No, she hasn't answered. Meanwhile, on the top floor of a hotel a few blocks away, Amara was drinking tea. She sat by the window, laptop open, watching the error graphs flash the very signals that Aurelia was frantically trying to figure out how to resolve. She did nothing. Didn't touch the keyboard, just looked. The system is not hacked. It is simply protecting itself, as programmed. When a user fails to meet the security conditions of the ethical compliance protocol, the system automatically locks itself temporarily to avoid risk. In other words, they are being mirrored by their own process. She breathed out softly. Justice doesn't need me to pull the trigger, she thought. They've loaded it long ago. By afternoon, major news outlets were broadcasting live from Aurelia headquarters. Hundreds of passengers were delayed, and the airport was in chaos. It's a temporary technical problem, the Aurelia spokesperson told reporters, trying to smile, but sweat was running down her forehead. At the same time, investors were calling in droves. One of them shouted through a loudspeaker, "We lost $500 million in 48 hours. What else are you hiding?" Daniel sat there, head down, silent. His phone vibrated continuously. A new message from Amara appeared. The system will be restored when Aurelia's passenger procedures are reviewed, and when an apology is made, not to me, but to all those who were treated as I was. No threats, no warnings, just a short, simple message, but enough to cause an entire corporation to collapse silently. That evening, social media exploded with the hashtag #WhoOwnsTheSky. Who really owns the sky? People discussed, analyzed, and shared Marcus's tweet and the original video. One veteran reporter commented, "An airline can own hundreds of planes, but if their operating platform is in the hands of someone else, the real power does not belong to them." Another wrote, "There are forms of justice that do not come from courts. They come from structures that intelligent people create to protect their own dignity." Amara gave no interviews. She did not appear on television. But the image of her, the woman leaving seat 1A with a calm smile, became a viral icon. People began to call her the silent controller. Meanwhile, Gregory Haynes, the man who had taken her seat, was suspended. The board ordered an investigation into behavior inconsistent with the diversity policy. He appeared before the press, his voice full of discontent. "I don't discriminate. It's just a misunderstanding." But the public stopped listening. Amara's silence, in stark contrast to his defense, made the line between right and wrong all too clear. Late that night, Daniel Mercer called Amara. His voice was tired, tinged with despair. "Amara, we need you to reopen the system. I understand. We made a mistake. But please, thousands of flights are grounded." Amara replied softly, her voice soft but firm, "Daniel. The system never went dead. It was just waiting for a signal confirming that Aurelia would act differently. What do you want? Not want. It's need," she corrected. "A public apology, a real investigation, and a commitment to reform." Silence fell on the line. Daniel didn't reply. But they both understood. The power play had changed forever. Amara hung up the phone and looked out at the city. She wasn't happy, nor was she sad. There was just a strange sense of peace, as if the scales had finally been turned. She opened her laptop and looked at the text on the screen. System stayed a standby, waiting for acknowledgement. A simple statement. But its meaning is greater than any speech. Justice is just waiting to be recognized. Sometimes justice comes not from the court, but from the light, when the truth is pushed out of the comfort zone of power and into the crowd. 2 days into the crisis, Aurelia Air has yet to issue a formal apology. The media is calling it the worst PR incident in private aviation history. But for Amara Lewis, it was more than just a PR crisis. It was the moment the balance began to shift. That morning, she received an email from a veteran journalist at The Atlantic. "We have a recording of the entire flight. Would you like to hear it again?" She hesitated for a few seconds, then clicked open the file. A voice rang out, the flight attendant's voice, polite to the point of emptiness. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Seat 1A has been allocated to our VIP guest. Thank you for your understanding." Amara's voice, light as a breath, I got it. Then came the sound of her footsteps leaving the chair, and immediately after, a man's voice rang out, confident, ironic, undisguised. "These people always think they belong here." The room was silent. No more planes, no more voices, just a heavy silence, as if the whole world had stopped to listen to itself. The audio clip was broadcast on the evening news that same day. Within an hour, millions of views. National television stations played it repeatedly, alternating between the Aurelia landing and Amara's calm face as she left the cabin. On social networks, people wrote, "This is no longer about an airline. This is a microcosm of society." She didn't say a word, but her silence spoke louder than any argument. And in that moment, the balance of power began to shift. As Aurelia sank into crisis, an emergency press conference was called. Daniel Mercer appeared before the cameras, his face pale, his neck tied in a tie. Next to him, the CNN microphone blared. He spoke slowly, his voice hoarse. "Aurelia Air accepts responsibility and apologizes to Ms. Amara Lewis and all passengers. We will temporarily suspend part of our operations while we conduct an internal investigation." But what stunned everyone was not the apology. It was when a reporter stood up and asked Mr. Mercer, "Is it correct that Ms. Lewis is the CEO of Novacore Systems, the company that runs Aurelia Air's entire AI platform?" He was silent, a second, then two. The camera light fell on his face, sweaty. The answer didn't need to be said, because everyone knew it was right. That evening, on every newscast, the phrase "Black CEO removed from first class" was plastered across the screen. Amara was called the calm in the storm. As for Aurelia Air, every story began with 2 words: collapse. Flights were delayed. Hundreds of passengers protested. Investors withdrew their investments. Even employees within the company began posting articles denouncing the inequality in corporate culture. A flight attendant wrote, "We used to be trained to recognize who the priority guest was. Today, I understand maybe it's time we relearn the concept of human." Meanwhile, Amara remained silent. She did not appear on camera, nor did she speak up to defend herself. She knew that in this noisy world, silence sometimes spoke louder than 1,000 excuses. She sent only one email to the Novacore technical team. No press coverage, no social media commentary. We let the facts speak for themselves. And strangely enough, it was that silence that turned public opinion on her side. People began to see more clearly that the powerful are not the ones who talk the most, but the ones who control what the world talks about. Gregory Haynes, the man who once occupied seat 1A, became the focus of a firestorm. The media went after his home, his former company, even his old LinkedIn posts. Another video was leaked of him at an internal party, joking, "If AI gets smarter, It might even want to sit in first class. The remark was meant to be humorous, but has now become cultural evidence for how he and many others see the world. The next day, Aurelia announced Gregory's suspension. But the damage was already done. Everyone knew it wasn't just one man who was at fault. It was the system that had nurtured him. At the small hotel by the bay, Amara sat watching the news in silence. The TV light reflected off her face, her eyes deep, dark, and calm. She wasn't happy. She just felt something else, the heaviness of victory. She spoke softly, as if only for herself to hear justice is not about making them fall. Justice is about making them see their true faces. As night fell, her phone vibrated. A text message from Marcus Young. "You don't need to say anything. The world speaks for itself." She read it, smiling slightly. That simple sentence, coming from a young engineer, encapsulated everything she believed, that justice didn't need to be shouted, just shown. The next day, Aurelia Air announced a partial system restore. But everyone knew it wasn't software they were trying to restore. It was broken trust. In the newspapers, Amara was described as the woman who taught the world a lesson with her silence. On the other side, Daniel Mercer prepared for the meeting. He knew was coming a face-to-face encounter with Amara Lewis. That moment is coming, where power no longer lies with which side is stronger, but with which side chooses to act with more dignity. Justice, sometimes, does not come with a thunderclap, but slowly in the calm manner of one who has been despised. The night after the recording went viral. Aurelia Air was in a state of near paralysis. Flights were delayed, stocks plummeted, investors were furious. The media called it a silent collapse. And Amara, that morning, walked down the hotel lobby, looking her usual self-gray suit, hair pulled back, deep eyes that reflected nothing but peace. She knew it was time to end this game not with retaliation, but with a conversation. A conversation right where it all began, the airport. The scene at Aurelia Air's domestic terminal that day was chaotic. Reporters jostled, staff rushed, passengers booed. Dozens of flights were displayed as delayed on the electronic screens. As Amara entered the VIP area, the crowd fell silent. A few people recognized her, whispering her name like someone from a newscast. She said nothing. She just nodded and headed straight for the door of Aurelia Air's latest test flight, where the executives were waiting. Daniel Mercer was there, along with several board members. His face was tired. Under the white lights of the airport, he looked a decade older than he looked on television. "Amara," he said as she approached, "we wanted to apologize in person for everything." She paused, her eyes still as light as mist. "Are you apologizing to me, or are you apologizing because your system is collapsing?" Daniel was silent. Behind him, the CFO, the COO all bowed their heads. She looked around. The people who had smiled politely at the signings now avoided her eyes. She didn't see joy. She saw a lesson being learned. She walked closer to Daniel and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm not here to make anyone kneel. I'm here to remind you that technology is just a reflection of people. You built a system on the assumption that some people are better than others. And now, that system has reacted exactly the way you treat others." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "Amara, I know we were wrong. Tell me, what can we do to make it right?" She opened her laptop and projected it onto her mobile screen. On it was the Sigma protocol dashboard, a series of red lights flashing. Cloud access locked. Scheduler frozen. Integration suspended. "Right now," she said slowly, "the project's $700 million is frozen. All of Aurelia's flight control AI systems are offline. I can get them back up in 10 minutes, or never." A silence fell between the men who had just realized they had lost control of what they once believed was theirs. Daniel swallowed. "What do you want?" "Amara not want," she corrected. "It was need. Aurelia needs to prove to you that you understand what is wrong." She set 3 conditions, not raising her voice, not threatening, but like a teacher calmly reading over a failed class test. First, Aurelia must publicly admit its mistakes, not blaming processes or misunderstandings, but acknowledging the systemic bias in how they operate. Second, they must institute a comprehensive reform program, not just to deal with the media, but to change how they treat real people. And third, in the next 48 hours, they must sign a new agreement with Novacore, allowing for independent monitoring and mandatory training on racial bias in operations. She paused, looking at Daniel. "You have 48 hours. After that, all of Aurelia's integrations with Novacore will be permanently deleted." Daniel was silent. Behind him, a few directors began to argue in low voices, but he raised a hand to stop them. His eyes fell on Amara for the first time. Not the eyes of someone in power, but of someone facing the truth. "Can you give us a chance?" Amara smiled. "I just gave you a chance." Then she folded the computer, turned, and walked away. As she passed through the waiting area, passengers recognized her. Some stood up and applauded. Others just watched in silence. No one shouted. No one cheered, just a quiet respect, as if they had just witnessed another example of strength. She didn't look back, because she knew what she needed to do now was not to win, but to let the world see who had lost. 2 hours later, the news broke Aurelia Air in urgent talks with Novacore Systems. $700 million project frozen. Stocks continued to fall. The board met all night. For the first time, those who had talked about hierarchy and process began to talk about ethics. In the hotel room, Amara sat by the window, watching the runway lights in the distance. Beside her, the laptop was still open, the words clearly visible. "System lock, 47, 59, 32. Remaining." Time counted down like a steady heartbeat. She didn't feel power, only a strange sense of peace, as if, finally, everything was falling into place. In this world, people still think of power as the ability to make others bow their heads, but to her, power is when you can make others lift their heads and see themselves in the mirror of action. As night fell, a message appeared on the screen. "Daniel Mercer, we accept. We will sign. Thanks for not shutting down the system." Amara looked at the message and smiled. Not a victorious smile, but the smile of someone who knew she had chosen the right path. She replied briefly, "Nobody wins. We're just starting to learn how to treat each other again. Every big decision leaves aftershocks. But the real aftershocks aren't the numbers or the stock prices. They're how people start to see themselves." After the airport confrontation, Aurelia Air officially entered what the press called the moment of reckoning. But for Amara Lewis, it wasn't a price. It was the inevitable consequence of a series of choices built on the blindness of privilege. Just hours after Amara left the airport, photos and live video of her conversation with Daniel Mercer flooded social media. An airport employee secretly recorded Daniel standing still at her words, then nodding a brief moment that, when replayed on television, was more powerful than any speech. The New York Times headlined, "The Woman Pushed Out of First Class and the $700 million Overturn of Silent Justice." CNN aired a special called "The Cost of Dignity." In it, the commentator spoke slowly and in a deep voice. She wasn't angry. She just held her ground and made the whole system bow down. In less than 24 hours, the video reached more than 5 million views. People shared it not because of the drama, but because they saw in it things that were once considered normal contemptuous looks, polite but discriminatory smiles, and the silence of witnesses. The next morning, Aurelia's San Francisco headquarters was packed with reporters, investors, and employees. A banner hung outside the door. Technology cannot be humane if people are not humane. Hundreds of employees signed a petition demanding the company publicly investigate its internal culture. The National Airline Union stepped in, announcing it would review passenger priority procedures across the U.S. system. A member of Aurelia's technical staff told the press, "We build AI to work faster, safer, but we fail to program respect." Within 48 hours, Aurelia's shares fell nearly 28%. Major investors called for an emergency meeting. A major pension fund announced it would suspend its cooperation due to moral and brand risk. Bloomberg Channel ran the news one discriminating word, one fall of hundreds of millions. At the same time, Novacore Systems, Amara's company, received unprecedented traffic. No one on her PR team issued a press release, but the online post spoke for her. "We are witnessing real power, the power of restraint." Nightly talk shows began to pick up on the story. No one called Amara a victim anymore. They called her the architect of consequence. An elderly commentator, a former pilot, said in tears, "I have been flying for more than 30 years and have seen many people who were considered in the wrong place. But she did not scream or demand revenge. She just did what the system fears most, forcing them to look at themselves in the mirror. Middle-aged viewers, white, black, Asian, everyone found something in that story a shame, a lesson, and a glimmer of hope that justice can still happen in a world full of excuses." The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, formally requested Aurelia to report on all of its passenger priority policies. The Civil Rights Commission launched an independent investigation. Even other airlines, Delta, United, Pacific Sky, announced a review of their VIP procedures. Within the industry, it's called the Amara effect, not because she wanted it, but because the system had no choice but to change. She did not appear on television, did not speak. When reporters approached her, she only said one short sentence, "I don't represent anyone. I only represent one principle, that respect should not need to be proven." Then she returned to Novacore's small office, where everyone greeted her with proud eyes. Marcus Young, the young engineer who had posted the first video, was now sitting in the conference room. Amara walked over, put her hand on his shoulder, and said, "Marcus, thank you. Not for posting the video, but for daring to see it." He smiled, eyes filled with tears. "If I had kept quiet that day, I wouldn't have been able to look at myself in the mirror." A week later, Amara's story was featured on the BBC and then spread to Europe and Asia. In Tokyo, a major airline announced the start of its Respect First program. In Johannesburg, a university held a conference called Power in Silence. No one remembers the exact day the story began, only that a woman chose to remain silent in cabin 1A, and the world began to speak. That night, Amara sat on the balcony, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. The sound of cars faded away, and a gentle breeze brushed against the cup of tea in her hand. The laptop next to it shows a new message. Aurelia Air signs reform pledge. Novacore system restored. She stared at the screen for a long time, then hung up. No need to celebrate. No need to declare. Because she understood the real victory wasn't in the $700 million deal, but in people relearning how to treat each other. She gently closed her eyes, thinking of what her mother had said years ago. "Sometimes, you don't need to speak loudly. Just be quiet enough for others to hear their own truth. The next morning, she went to the office as usual. On her desk was a white envelope from the FAA, an invitation to serve on the advisory panel on ethics in aviation technology. Amara read, then smiled. Not out of honor, but because she knew this conversation would continue. And this time, it would not be muted. True justice isn't about making wrongdoers suffer consequences. It's about making an entire system learn not to repeat the same mistake again. After Aurelia Air signed the reform agreement and Novacore's system was restored, people thought the story was over. The press began to talk about Amara as the woman who made an entire corporation bow. But for her, that was only half the battle. She understood that if it stopped at an apology, the world would quickly forget. If it stopped at victory, justice would become a moment, not a change. 3 days after the crisis, Amara received a call from Aurelia's lawyer. The man's voice on the other end was cautious. "Lewis, we hope the matter will be resolved internally. You have been apologized to. The project has been restored. There is no need to expand further." "Right," Amara replied calmly. "If I keep silent, who will be the one to suffer the humiliation next time so they can learn this lesson again?" That answer was the turning point. She decided to take Gregory Haynes to court not to destroy him, but to set a precedent of personal responsibility that no one could hide behind the word process to avoid the consequences of their actions. When the news of Amara suing Gregory broke, the public was shocked. Some were supportive, others skeptical. What more does she need? She already won. But those who know her know Amara doesn't sue to win. She sues to establish a principle that insult, no matter how wrapped in power or politeness, is still insult. In court, Gregory's lawyer argued Mr. Haynes was speaking in a private context, not in a public manner. Amara sat listening, not reacting. When it was her turn, she said only one sentence: "Nothing is private when it hurts the dignity of others." The whole courtroom was silent. In that moment, everyone understood this was no longer a lawsuit, but a dialogue between people and conscience. In parallel with the lawsuit, Amara began working again with Daniel Mercer, CEO of Aurelia. This time, not through a lawyer, but a private meeting in a small conference room at Novacore headquarters. Daniel looked different from before, quiet and somewhat modest. He opened his mouth. "Amara, we have restarted the staff training program, but I know that is not enough." Amara nodded. "No one can police themselves. Daniel, real reform requires outside oversight, and real people must represent those left behind." She placed a file on the table. The Aurelia Rebuild Initiative plan that she and the Novacore team had drawn up established a passenger representative committee made up of people from all walks of life, ethnicities, and genders, with the power to oversee service policy, establish a system of independent third-party verification, quarterly reporting on biased or discriminatory practices, create mandatory cognitive bias training for all employees, from flight attendants to executives, and finally, 2% of revenue each year goes to the Respect in Air Fund, scholarships for students of color studying aviation and engineering. Daniel read each page, his eyes gradually changing. "You want to turn this incident into a new system." Amara smiled slightly. "No, I just want the old system to learn how to be human." 3 weeks later, the deal was signed. The ceremony was small, no fireworks, no media frenzy, just Amara, Daniel, Marcus, and a few members of the program's launch team. Before signing, Daniel said softly, "You know, Amara, maybe I should thank you. If you had reacted differently that day, we might never have seen the cracks in ourselves. Amara simply replied, "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those who offend us is to give them a chance to see their limits." 2 months later, the court issued a verdict. Gregory was officially convicted of defamation, fined, and required to perform 300 hours of community service. But the special thing was not the fine. The court added a special provision. Gregory had to participate in the Empathy and Leadership Training Program, a course sponsored by Aurelia's Respect in Air Fund. When the reporter asked Amara how she felt, she replied softly, "I don't need him to apologize to me. I just need him to learn not to make others suffer the same." After the lawsuit and the new settlement, many other corporations began to contact Novacore to learn from the technology ethics oversight model. Amara's company not only restored its reputation, but also became a symbol of a new leadership philosophy where technology serves justice, not conceals mistakes. Universities invited her to speak. She turned most of them down, except for one, the National Civil Aviation School, where she had applied and been rejected 20 years earlier. During that conversation, she told the students I didn't win because I was smarter than them. I just didn't let them make me forget who I was. That night, Amara returned to her old apartment by the bay. On the table was a thank you letter from a flight attendant who had served on the fateful flight. "I used to believe I was just following the process. Now I understand. Sometimes process is how we legitimize cowardice." Amara read it, then folded it up and put it in a drawer with her Flight 1A ticket, yellowed, but still creased. She kept it not as a wound, but as a reminder. True justice is when others begin to see what we see. She closed her eyes, the sound of the waves lapping gently at the sea. The world was still noisy. People were still jostling for their seats, on planes and in society. But she knew something had changed. Not much, not fast, but enough to create a crack of light in the old wall of power. When a storm passes, people often look back to see the damage. But there are storms that, instead of blowing away, clear the sky so that people can see who really stood firm in the wind. 3 days after Gregory's verdict, the mood in the U.S. airline industry has not calmed down. The media, watchdogs, and investors are still watching every move of Aurelia Air. Now not just an airline, but an icon learning to survive. And at the center of all that change, Amara Lewis remains calm. No camera, no speech, just quietly operating. The countdown timer in Sigma protocol was just over 2 hours before the data would be automatically erased if Aurelia did not sign a binding ethics agreement. Novacore was prepared for either scenario. Either Aurelia would truly change, or the system would automatically retreat for good. At Aurelia headquarters, the lights stayed on all night. Daniel Mercer, CEO, stood in the conference room with a cold cup of coffee, looking at the term sheet in front of him. Independent inspection mechanism, quarterly transparency report, multi-ethnic passenger and employee oversight committee, and in particular, the moral and legal binding, so that any future discriminatory behavior could be seen as a breach of contract. He sighed, looking around the room. No one objected. No one dared. Those who had scoffed at Amara now just wanted to sign quickly to save what was left of their reputation. He signed. The ink dried on the paper, and with it, an old chapter closed. The next morning, 7:02 a.m., Novacore received a confirmation signal. Amara sat in her small office on the 27th floor, looking at the status line that appeared "System Restored, Ethical Agreement Verified." No cheers, no applause. She just leaned back slightly, breathing lightly as if letting go of a burden she had carried for too long. Marcus walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Are you done, boss?" She smiled. "Yes, it's done. But it's just the beginning." He nodded. There was gratitude in his eyes, the young engineer who had unwittingly started that storm, and a feeling that he had just witnessed something rare. A woman of color teaching the world how to wield power without using her fists. News of Aurelia signing the pledge spread throughout the business world. Financial channels called it the first legally binding ethical agreement in the commercial aviation industry. Gregory Haynes, after being convicted, was officially removed from the aviation industry. But what caught the public's attention was not the sentence, but the way he appeared in public apology. He said into the camera, his voice trembling, "I used to think that being good was enough to be respected. Today I understand. No one is truly good if they do not respect others." It was the first time the public was silent. No one applauded. There was only a strange feeling, like a wound that had just been stitched up, still painful, but healing. Around the same time, Amara sent an internal email to the Novacore team. "We will open a new project, Human Code, a program to apply AI to community projects. Leader Marcus Young." When Marcus read the email, he was stunned. He couldn't believe that he, an unknown engineer who had simply raised his phone that day, had been chosen. He found her, his voice still trembling. "I don't think I'm old enough to lead this project," Amara replied softly. "Marcus, you don't need to grow up. You just need to keep the same eyes that saw the truth that day." That saying was later quoted in the press as a symbol of the new leadership philosophy. Not everyone with power deserves to be heard. Only those with conscience should be led. The deal with Aurelia is more than just a commitment. Just a few months later, the first reports from third-party audits show that real change has begun. Discrimination complaint rates fell 73%. Employees from minority groups are promoted 40% more often. And more than 2,000 students received respect and Air Fund scholarships. As for Amara, she chose not to take on any direct supervisory role. She told Daniel Mercer in their final meeting, "I don't want to be here to remind you to do the right thing. I want to leave knowing that, next time, you will remind yourself." Daniel just replied softly, "You did more than a CEO could do. You taught me to be a human being before being a leader." Many people ask Amara, "Do you hate Gregory? Do you want to see him fail?" She often smiled and shook her head. "I don't want to see him fall. I just want him to wake up." Then she told a little story. "When I was 16, I was kicked out of a store because they thought I was going to steal. I was so angry. I swore I would never forget. But when I grew up, I understood. Forgiveness is not to forget. Forgiveness is to not let them take up more space in my heart. And perhaps, because of that, she not only won, but her victory became clean." A year later, Amara stood on a podium at the Ethics and Technology Conference. Behind her were the words, "The sky belongs to everyone." In the audience, Marcus sat in the front row, and Daniel Mercer was there too. This time not to explain, but to listen. She said slowly, "The day I was asked to leave seat 1A, I thought the world had gotten smaller, but then I realized the sky hasn't gotten smaller. It's just that some people have forgotten that it belongs to all of us." The whole room was silent. No loud applause, just silent glances. That rare silence when people really understand what is being said. That night, she returned home, opened the window, and looked out at the ocean. The 1A ticket was still in the drawer, next to the thank you letter from the flight attendant. She took it out, looked at it for a long time, then placed both of them in a small glass frame. Not to brag, but to remind every great journey begins from a small seat, if you have the patience to rise not in anger, but in wisdom. She smiled softly, closing the window. Outside, planes streaked across the night sky, this time, perhaps, fairer, more peaceful. Not all battles end with applause. Some battles end in silence, a peaceful silence, when people understand that they have touched the right thing, not just one. When Aurelia Air signed a binding ethics agreement and Novacore Systems restored full access, the media hailed it as a historic victory for corporate justice. But for Amara Lewis, it wasn't a victory. It was the completion of an ethical life cycle. A month after the crisis, the news buzz began to die down. News stories began to appear on the news, stocks, elections, politics. The story of the woman pushed out of seat 1A quietly drifted into longer, more in-depth columns, where journalists began to discuss the meaning of power and dignity in the digital age. In a rare interview, Amara said, "If people only remember me as the person who got an airline to sign a deal, then I failed. I want them to remember that it all started with one thing: respect." Her voice was soft, without any pride, like someone who had walked away from a battle and no longer needed anyone to call her a winner. With her bonus and dividends from the restructuring deal with Aurelia, Amara established the Respect in Air Fund, an annual scholarship fund for students of color pursuing aviation, technology, and business ethics. At the introduction ceremony, she did not say much. She just recited what her mother had said years ago: "Don't just try to sit in first class. Make sure that when you leave, that seat is open for someone else." The audience, engineers, students, airline executives, stood up and applauded, not because of the amount she raised, but because they sensed she wasn't vindictive. She was giving back. Each year, the foundation selects 10 students, not just for their grades, but because they carry within them a story of self-esteem and a dream of pushing boundaries. After the Respect in Air program officially launched, many people expected Amara to return to flying with Aurelia Air, but she never did. In an interview with the Atlantic Business Review, she simply said, "It's not that I'm mad at them. I just think I've done my part there. I want to build bridges, not go back to the same place just to check if the cracks have been patched." This saying became a motto that spread throughout the business community and media: no revenge, only creation. And indeed, after that incident, Amara stopped flying with Aurelia. She chose smaller airlines, regional flights, and often sat in economy class, as a way to remind herself that a person's worth is never determined by the number of seats, but by how they sit in them. Marcus Young, a young engineer, now the head of the Human Code Project. One evening, during an online interview, he was asked, "Do you think you got lucky because you were filming that day?" Marcus smiled and replied, "No, I think the real luck was meeting the right person who made me understand that I could be different. I didn't just film it, I saw it." Since then, the Human Code Project has expanded into other areas: AI applications in public health, training engineers in disadvantaged areas. People have called it the moral legacy of Aurelia, but for Marcus, it's simply his way of continuing what Amara started. As for Daniel Mercer, CEO of Aurelia, he still holds his position, but he now appears less often, speaks more slowly, and when he talks about company culture, he often quotes Amara, "Don't wait for someone else to remind you to do the right thing." As for Gregory Haynes, the man who caused it all, after completing his community sentence, he was recognized as an active participant in the Empathy and Leadership Education program. Once, when asked why he did not leave the industry, he simply replied, "I used to think the sky was mine. Now I understand. I'm the only one allowed to fly in it, No one forgives him, but no one hates him either. Perhaps that is the deepest form of justice, to let the wrongdoer learn to live rightly, not to let him disappear. After all that, Amara stepped down from her executive role at Novacore and moved into a strategy consulting role, spending much of her time teaching at universities on ethical leadership and humanistic technology. One late autumn afternoon, she walked out of a lecture hall at Stanford, where she had just finished giving a talk on wisdom over anger. A student asked her, "Ma'am, if you could rewind the moment you were pushed out of first class, would you do anything differently?" Amara smiled, her eyes distant. "No, I will still get up. But this time, I will smile sooner." Looking back, some people say Amara was the one who won the power struggle. But if you ask her, she will shake her head. "I didn't win anyone. I just proved that the truth doesn't need to be shouted." She did not avenge Gregory. She did not punish Aurelia. She did not expose her pain. She simply let the consequences speak for themselves where words could not. And perhaps that is the real message. Justice does not need to be made loud. Dignity does not need to be defended with fists. And sometimes, silence can change a system, if it comes from wisdom. Finally, in the closing shot of the documentary, the camera follows Amara as she boards a small plane operated by a local airline. She sits in the middle row, next to an elderly woman and a young boy holding a paper airplane model. The old lady recognized her and asked softly, "You are the person in that story, aren't you?" Amara smiled and nodded slightly. The boy looked up and asked, "Are you afraid of flying anymore?" She glanced out the window, where the sky was dyed in the golden sunset, and then replied, "No, the sky has never been wrong. It is only humans who forget that it is big enough for all of us." The camera lingers there, no background music, no special effects, just the sound of the engine fading away, and the light reflecting on the peaceful eyes of a woman who has learned to turn shame into legacy, trauma into opportunity to build bridges, sometimes after long nights. Amara Lewis plays back recordings from her old podcasts, talks she intended to record for students, but which later went viral, becoming an inspiration to millions. Her voice on the first recording was low, light, and a little hoarse, the kind of timbre only found in people who speak from the heart, without emphasis or persuasion. "True power is not making people fear you," she says, "but making them want to be better people when they see how you confront injustice." Amara didn't talk about the victory, didn't mention Aurelia, didn't recount the incident. Instead, she talked about that morning, sitting in row 18C, clutching her cold coffee and thinking, maybe I should say something. Maybe I should fight back. But she chose to remain silent, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to understand why people believed they had the right to do so. Then she let out a small sigh in the podcast, as if talking to herself sometimes. What changes us is not anger, but the moment we realize if we react like them, then no one is different anymore. Listeners call it a lesson in composure. But for Amara, it's simply a way of surviving in a world where power and prejudice mix like air. One of the most popular episodes in her podcast series is called "The Seat You Give Up." In it, she tells the story from the perspective of an outsider, the passengers who were silent that day. No one cursed at me. No one pushed me away. They were just silent. But it was that silence that made me feel smaller than any words. She paused for a few seconds, then continued, "When you remain silent in the face of injustice, you are not just complicit. You are sending a message that it is acceptable." And then her voice softened. I'm not mad at them. I just hope that next time they see someone being treated unfairly, they will take note, speak up, or at least create evidence. That saying later became a slogan that went viral on social media. Don't be silent. Record. Remember. Respond. One afternoon, Amara was invited to speak on a local radio show. The host asked her if you could say one thing to those who have looked down on you. What would you say? She smiled and replied, I would say, be kind. Because the person you look down on today may be the one who holds your future. The answer silenced the studio, not because it was sharp, but because it was so true. Amara did not speak in anger. She spoke as someone who had lived through it all, who understood that all power was fragile one moment, one false landing, one misstep in attitude, and the scales could tip. We never know who will open the door for us tomorrow, she said. And sometimes it's the person we made feel small yesterday. In her final podcast episode, Amara talks about the true power of being human. She recounts her journey, not to brag, but to learn what she calls the essence of power. People think of power as the ability to command, she said, but real power is the ability to change structures so that the next person doesn't have to endure what you had. She mentioned the Respect in Air Fund. She mentioned Marcus, Daniel, and Gregory. Each of them, right or wrong, became part of the process of change. If I just punished them, it would be a personal lesson. But when I changed the structure, the lesson would repeat itself every day, on every flight, with every person. That's when the listener understands the justice Amara aims for is not to end a wrong, but to prevent it from happening again. She told about the last moment on that fateful flight, when she stood up to leave seat 1A. I didn't know I was starting a chain reaction. I just knew I didn't want to react the way they expected. And by choosing to stay calm, I gave them the opportunity to feel ashamed. Then she continued, her voice lower. Justice is not revenge. It is the natural consequence of truth. But restoration, that is what makes justice meaningful. Listeners sent thousands of thank you notes. Some said they learned not to be silent about small injustices. Others said they apologized to a colleague, an employee, or a stranger, all because they realized they had contributed to that silence. For the final podcast of the series, Amara wasn't in a studio. She recorded elsewhere on a night flight to Chicago. The hum of engines echoed. Glasses clinked against metal trays. She said slowly, if you are listening to this, remember, the world doesn't change because of powerful people. It changes when ordinary people dare to acknowledge what is wrong and speak out what is right. Then she paused, a moment of silence, before saying the final sentence, the sky is big enough for all of us, but it is only truly beautiful when everyone has their own place. That was the final line of the podcast and the conclusion of her journey. The final scene of the video plays over soft music. Amara standing in front of a glass window of an airport, watching planes take off into the sunset. No one recognizes her. No cameras, no interviews. Just the calm face of someone who has chosen dignity over reaction, wisdom over anger, and legacy over revenge. The screen slowly darkened. The text appeared. The person who was pushed out of seat 1A did not lose her seat. She just found a bigger sky to sit in. The story of Black CEO removed from first class minutes later. 700 Mainers deal. Vanishes is more than just about discrimination on a single flight. It's a mirror of a society where prejudice and power still go hand in hand, like two sides of the same coin. But what makes this story memorable isn't the $700 million reversal of power, but how Amara Lewis chose to face the insult. She didn't scream. She didn't retaliate. She didn't let her anger control her. Instead, she chose wisdom, composure, and structured action so that justice would come not through retaliation, but through the natural consequences of truth. From being pushed out of seat 1A, she rebuilt a more just system so that the next person wouldn't have to suffer that humiliation again. The biggest lesson from this story is that dignity does not need a shout to be recognized. Sometimes guided silence, guided by wisdom and dignity, is the most powerful voice. And in this world full of boundaries, perhaps true power lies in not letting others dictate how we react, but using our own reactions to redefine the world. If you feel this story touches your heart, please like and share to spread the message of justice and respect. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories that remind people that true power is not about position, but about how we choose to treat each other.